Well, thanks everybody for joining. This is Let's Discuss Developer Education. Super fortunate to have some of the best community leaders here, and I think we're going to have a great discussion today. So, if we want to just kind of go through and start off by everybody kind of introducing themselves, I'm going to start off by just asking through the list that I have in that little social card. So, Angie, if you want to kick it off, you want to give a brief introduction and maybe something you're working on?
Okay, yeah. So I'm Angie Jones. I am Senior Director of Developer Relations at Tools, and also created Test Automation University. So there are courses there for like all things testing, which, yes, I see the hands going up. A lot of developers, unfortunately, are not taught a lot about how to build quality software. So have a lot of courses there. Also, just released a course on LinkedIn Learning on APIs. And so I think in total, I have about 6 courses out there.
That's quite a good catalog. Cool. Scott, you want to go next?
Hey, my name is Scott Hanselman. Right now I work at Microsoft on open source C# and .NET. I went to Microsoft in order to open source everything. I've got a YouTube, I've got a podcast with over 800 episodes, and I'm having way too much fun on TikTok right now. I just finished doing learning C# 1 minute at a time for the last 25 days on TikTok.
That's amazing. Love to see the different social networks and mediums used in creative ways. Allie, do
I,
you want to go next?
mm,
Or
hey,
Angie, want me to add something?
I was just going to tease Scott and say I don't, and I miss him on Twitter. And that's one of the reasons we brought him to the space. He is an excellent educator, but also he's on TikTok too much, and he needs to come on back home.
I'm on. You need to turn on notifications on my tweets. I'm here. I never left.
All right, all right.
Too funny, too funny. I am Allie. I lead developer advocacy at AWS Amplify. So I get to teach code in a little bit of a different fashion through that job. But before this, I actually was the faculty lead at General Assembly. So I was in charge of the software engineering immersive program and teaching that, and actually teaching teachers how to teach as well. In school, I was an education minor, so I went through my shadow semester and all that. So I have a little bit more formal teaching education as well, which is kind of fun. But now I get to test out different mediums like blog posts and podcasting and YouTube and all those types of things. So I think that's really fun too, even though I'm not teaching in a classroom anymore.
That's awesome. A lot of different places to be able to put that content, which is really great. How about you, Wes? Do you want to go next?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Wes Boss. I'm a full stack developer focused primarily on JavaScript stack from Canada. And I've taught in the classroom a couple years ago. And the last, I don't know, 8 years of my life, I've been full go on making online courses, as well as I have a podcast called Syntax, which we do twice a week.
Awesome. And Laurie, do you want to you next?
Sure. Me discovering Wes is from Canada just now. Cool. Hi. Um, I'm Laurie. I am a software engineer at Netflix. Previously, I was at Gatsby, and while there, I was an IC for a while, but I was also on the learning team when I originally started. I do a lot of blog posts. I'm an egghead instructor, and I'm a part of a group called the TC39 Educators Committee. And our goal is to educate people about upcoming specs and potential new features in the JavaScript language, so that all of you can get involved in the bike shedding conversations in GitHub before things are added to the language.
Love it, love it, love it. Well, everybody, if this is your first tour space, we're going to try to keep it pretty casual. Just try to have a good conversation here. But if anybody has any questions, I'm definitely going to reserve some time a little bit later. And you can also feel free to DM me or use the hashtag DevDiscussEDU, and I'll try to field all the questions. So to start off, I'm going to just start off with a bang here. Do you need a formal education to be a developer? And whoever wants to take it, go for it.
So I'll just start and give the most obnoxious answer to this question. Hi, I'm Laurie. I have a undergraduate education in mathematics and a master's degree in computer science, and the answer is no.
I'm Scott Hanselman, and I went to Portland Community College. And everything that I learned in school is all dead languages that I don't use anymore. But I would say it never hurts. And we do live in a community where, depending on your background, sometimes you need to check the box because it's not that you got the degree, but that you stuck with it. And some employers look at that degree as being proof that you know how to learn. It's not necessarily that you know that topic, but that you've proven that you'll stick with something. But no, you should not need a degree, but it definitely doesn't hurt.
Yeah, I get this question on the podcast a lot as well, and I'm certainly glad there are people that have computer science degrees that are building self-driving cars and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, a lot of us are putting squares on the web and updating those squares when you hit buttons and things like that. And I think as long as you have time to learn things, and that doesn't necessarily have to be through school. I have a business degree, and everything that I have learned was self-taught.
I want to agree with you, Wes, and add on very briefly. I apologize for jumping back in, but I want to juxtapose it a very, very clear difference between a computer science degree, the science of computers, and a software engineering degree or a software engineering technology degree, which is the practice of delivering and shipping software. So, like a person that gets a degree or a master's in how to make compilers is definitely not the same skill as someone who's putting text boxes over data, to
Yeah.
Wes's point.
Yeah, for sure. I can plus one to all this. I quit computer science in college because I thought I wasn't smart enough and had a lot of imposter syndrome there. And so I am also like 90% self taught, where I taught myself everything except for Python 101, essentially. And I also, working in a boot camp for so many years, seeing that education and how relevant it was to a lot of people's jobs, I think that that's a really excellent path as well. Like self teaching is great, boot camps are great, computer science degrees are great. At the end of the day, everybody learns differently, and the way that you get into the field, it's going to be harder or easier, maybe depending on that path. But once you're here, most of the learning is going to be on the job and self teaching, anyways. And so I think it's a really, really important skill to have as a developer, even if you are going through a more formal path.
Yeah, totally agree with all of that. I have a bachelor's and a master's, both in computer science. And yeah, it taught me the fundamentals, and that probably was good for me, because back then I wasn't, the most disciplined self teacher. Also, I didn't know anything about anything, I was fresh out of high school or whatever. So that might not be the case for everybody else. I see Natalie in the chat. She is, someone who transferred from another career into tech. Well, that doesn't make sense to, go all the way back to school just to get started. Now, she's publicly said that, hey, I think I might want to go get that computer science degree, but she's proven that you can do it without it. She's already working as a software engineer, just like I am. So it doesn't really matter how you get the education as long as you get it, is my take.
Yeah, and it's definitely interesting to see the different paths people take, whether it's trying to learn to code to automate something for their job that's completely unrelated or because they're interested in it. But for the people that are actually going through like a non-formal education, do you think there's any gaps in that kind of self-teaching path? And what kind of gaps do you see?
I have a question. So this is really good, and I just observed this right now. So Kobe is actually one of my reports, and I have no idea what Kobe's educational background is. Like, I just didn't care when interviewing him. It's like, can you do the job or not? Kobe, what is your background? Do you have a degree?
Yeah, I have a degree, but it's called integrative arts, so it's like graphic design and photography, and I just kind of self-taught myself along the way.
So look at that. All right, sorry. What was your question? What was your next question?
Yeah. So for the non-formal educational path, like people who are trying to self-teach themselves, what kind of gaps are we facing in the community? And like, what do those gaps look like? What can we do better as educators to try to fill those gaps?
I think no matter the path that you take, there's going to be gaps. So, for example, computer science degrees, like they often don't teach things like Git or JavaScript or HTML and CSS, and so you have to teach those on the job. But then some boot camps don't teach data structures and algorithms, which might be something that you need to self-teach on the job as well, depending on what you do at that job. That being said, though, boot camps are doing more and more with data structures and algorithms, and it's something that I always did teach, even if it was more at a surface level. But other things like maybe you don't learn like C++ in school and you need that for some reason at work. Like no matter what, there's going to be gaps. And so the most important skill that you can have as a developer is the ability to teach yourself that new thing. And whether you gain that skill through a degree or you gain that skill through a boot camp or through self-teaching initially, I think all of those are valid. And no matter what, the field is evolving. And so there's no way to tell the future. You're always going to have to learn something new. That's just the way the field is.
Definitely 100% agree with that. Like my boss says, when you're putting together a basketball team, you can't teach height, but everything else can be taught: ball handling, rules of the sport, everything. But you just need to get tall people. And I really appreciate what Angie said, that she didn't know what Colby's background is. I have a team of 10, and I just realized, thanks to Angie mentioning it, I literally have no idea what any of their degrees are or if they even have degrees. And they all work at Microsoft, because it's honestly never came up because they're all just really tall. Angie is quite tall as well.
Coming from the traditional education background, one thing I envy about those who are self-taught, it seems that they have more focus on not just learning the material, but building portfolio projects. And I didn't have that in school. You learned a lesson, you took tests, you wrote very small programs, but not like these comprehensive projects. I think I only had like one project in undergrad, and that was a senior project, right? So like, oh, let's put together everything you learned in 4 years or whatever into a group project. But I feel like maybe self-taught folks and maybe even boot camp folks have an advantage there that they can leverage, where they're kind of building their own curriculum. So if you are taking that path, I highly recommend, if it's not part of the lecture, I know Wes has a lot of kind of project types of things in his courses, but if it's not part of the lecture that you're taking, definitely try to build that in or find some resources that'll guide you through that, because that's really the key. Like academic wise, like, yeah, you might know these terms and things like that, but the real skill comes in knowing how to apply them, when to apply them, and how to Google.
Yeah, that's funny. That's actually the thing I was going to say can be the biggest gap, and it can be a gap for either the traditional learners or the boot campers, depending on what skills they need on the job, and that's jargon. So if you are coming from a traditional background and you end up working on something that involves a graph, or you need to worry about, O of N, or really deep data structure stuff, you might have an advantage if you have a computer science background or even a software engineering degree, versus if you're coming from a boot camp and you've learned the more modern tools and frameworks like React, like Git. You've talked about NPM, and that's obviously in the JavaScript ecosystem, but those are terms that don't necessarily come up in computer science education that's based on curriculum that's sort of more quote unquote core and has existed for a long time and doesn't get updated every time there's something new that's sort of captured the attention of the ecosystem.
One thing I took away from actually doing 4 years of school, even though it wasn't a comp sci degree, was just like growing up. So I went from high school to this environment where you have to start to be professional and you have good communication. I took classes on writing emails and stuff like that, working with people, doing things you don't want to do, and hitting deadlines is a really big one. So there's just like a lot of like, I don't know, grit that I learned in university, of like some of it is hard and a lot of it you don't want to have to do, and it seems a little bit silly, but being able to push through that and come up in a little bit more of a professional environment was huge for, I think, my communication with, once I actually did hit the working world.
And one thing that that Ali and Laurie both touched on, the whole computer sciencey things like the ON, or what are the other big O? Like I still don't even know what any of those are because I didn't learn them since I don't have a traditional computer science degree. Like, and I think a lot of people also feel the same way. Is like, am I missing out by not getting a computer science degree? And of course, it has value. Like we all just heard those kind of things, but are people actually missing out with some of these algorithmic terms and things?
I would say I don't ever want to be a gatekeeper to say that you should go and get a degree because, like you say, we've already proven that you don't need a degree. But yes, you are missing out if you don't need those things. The example that I always give is you could be an Uber rider, not a driver, but like you're a person who wants to go from point A to point B. So you're going to take an Uber. And let's say that the tire pops and now you have to deal with that. If you also happen to be a mechanic, you could help the driver of the Uber fix the car. How much of a mechanic do you need to be a successful rider of an Uber? Arguably not at all. But if you know how to change the oil, you know how like that cars have wheels, you know the jargon, you know how to change the oil, you have basic understanding of the vehicle that you're driving in, you will be arguably a better and more informed rider of the Uber, even though it's not required. If you don't need to know how to drive stick, but you're arguably going to know more. So I always encourage people to go one layer below their comfort zone. That doesn't mean you need to be an assembly language programmer in order to put text boxes over data with React, but you'll have a more enriching life, right? If you have a basic understanding of biology, you're going to have a better understanding of how the COVID vaccine works. Fortunately, all these things can be learned online if you are a autodidact or someone who can teach yourself. But university is a place where they can put you on rails, no pun intended, and teach you that stuff in order. I don't think you need to go to school, but knowing stuff underneath other stuff absolutely is important. So yeah, you should learn order and stuff somewhere. Doesn't matter where.
I just wanted to say I really appreciate the idea of one level down from wherever you are. Because I think oftentimes people say, this is foundational, and it's foundational depending on what layer of the stack they're working on. And yes, it's good to understand how the tools you're using work because it's how you debug them, but you don't need to go 5 levels down. That being said, if you're, working on kernel programming, one level down might be assembly. But if you're working on, a design system, one level down might be might be a better understanding of how the CSS DOM in the browser is working.
That is a brilliant way to put it, Ali. I appreciate that. Like, if you're working on the C# compiler, you need to know what assembly language is. If you're working in JavaScript, your assembly language is JavaScript. And that's as far down as you need to go. And that's cool.
Anybody else want to touch on that quick, or I think we might be good with that? So kind of further along that kind of, Ali, were you going to say something?
Oh, no, you're good. I was just
Okay.
going to say that it was something that I learned myself because I challenged myself to do a Google interview like very early in my career. And they give you like a handbook to study for those types of interviews pretty much. And so I did not learn these things at school whatsoever, but I did learn them in a self-taught way. And so it's very much possible.
That brings up a good point. I mean, someone reached out to me on LinkedIn this week, and she said, "Hey, I've studied Java. I've done projects. I've even worked in Java, in a professional setting. And I'm looking for a new job and I can't pass the coding challenges. Why not? And I feel like I don't know enough or something." And I told her, not to detour from the conversation, but I told her that the interview process is broken and you almost need to study for these two things separately, right? So you study to know how to do the job, and then you also got to study to pass the interview. Now, what you know to do the job is not enough to pass the interview, unfortunately. And so I pointed her to a few resources to learn these sorts of things and how to do the stupid puzzles and all of that goofy stuff, just so you can pass the interview. So for anyone to call who might have been doubting themselves or feeling like you didn't know enough when you're actually doing the work, just know that our system is broken, unfortunately.
agreed with what Angie said, but it's on the same tangent. But it's actually really interesting how many developer education materials get read because it's people trying to prep for an interview and because it's people trying to figure out, oh, they mentioned I'm going to need to know TypeScript, so I'm going to read a bunch of TypeScript articles before I have this interview. And that's a reasonable thing to do, but yes, being able to use the thing and being able to pass the random question test or the trivia test or even like do a hands-on tree recursion whatever thing during an interview is probably going to be very different than the job you do. And those of us who interview are, I hope, I speak for myself here, but hopefully for others, we're trying really hard to change that. We know it's really not okay.
Yeah. My 15-year-old is getting ready for an AP test right now, and it's going to be his first big life test, like he's a freshman in high school, and he's going to cram. And we've been warning him. We're like, dude, you've got 6 weeks to plan. You've got 4 practice tests. He doesn't know how to learn yet. He's still learning how to learn. So he is going to cram, and he's going to basically pull a B out of his ass, and he's going to feel bad about it. And then he's going to go, oh, wow, I need to learn how to learn. So cramming is a good thing, but fundamentals. The problem is fundamentals don't feel like you're doing anything, while cramming does feel like you're doing something. So like we need to teach people how to think about systems and how to learn, as opposed to memorizing trivia the night before the test.
I love that. I think that's so important and something that we should continue as a conversation. I also want to say though, for anybody in the audience who's listening and maybe hasn't done a lot of programming interviews, I've only had one programming interview in my life that has these topics. I have had 4 jobs in the industry. I've had many more job offers than that. I've had one interview ever that has asked these kind of trivia questions, and I think it's something that in general, the industry may be moving away from at least a little bit, and especially at startups. So if you're like listening to this terrified, I think that definitely there are parts of the interview process that are broken, and there are companies that do these trivia type interviews or these really tough whiteboarding challenges, but they're rarer than you would think, I believe.
I think that's interesting, and it like, kind of goes back to I've talked to Angie about this about their interview process, but it's almost as if some employers want to see you fail, and they're trying to put those gotchas in there, as opposed to like as an
Not us,
interviewer
right,
myself.
Toby? Not us. Tell the people not
Exactly,
us.
exactly.
Oh,
Like
okay.
I want to set that person up to succeed because I ultimately want to bring them on my team.
Yeah, I had an old boss who said the goal with their interview process, and this was when I was first learning how to be an interviewer, the goal with their process was to figure out the edges of their knowledge, to get you right up close to the area where you didn't know something, but not to that point. So find all the things that you know and then find the edges of your knowledge and figure out how that domain of knowledge fit into an existing team, which just felt so much more approachable and kind and reasonable than, hey, this is our box. Do you fit in it? Cool, great, bye.
Absolutely. So to kind of further on the topic of like the certain things that people are learning, when you're talking to people who are trying to learn something new, how do you recommend somebody specializing on something versus going more broad? Of course, the overused term of jack of all trades, but that kind of thing. Where's kind of the line there?
I have an opinion on that one. I don't say jack of all trades. I say Swiss Army knife, because like you can do all kinds of stuff with a Swiss Army knife, but it's like a really lousy pair of scissors. Like it's pretty much lousy at everything, but at least it knows a little bit about a lot of stuff. So I've been a generalist my entire career, and that has served me very, very well. I haven't, hitched my wagon to any technology, and in doing that, I've prevented the obsoleting of the things that I know. Computers will always have CPUs and memory and storage. And when the cloud happened, I was working at a website called 800.com, which was like pre-Amazon. So I already knew how to scale big systems. Scaling systems and the rules behind scaling systems doesn't matter Azure or Amazon or whatever digital something, like the fundamental rules of physics do not change. So I feel like by staying at the base of the pyramid, I've kept myself from being obsoleted, and it's worked for 30 years.
I
Scott,
really
what
like that.
I had a quick
Oh, go
question
for
for
it, Angie.
Scott. Scott, would you consider yourself an expert in something? Like if I said, what are you an expert in, Scott? I know you can do a bunch of things, but what are you an expert in? What would you say?
Like if I was a doctor, like what's my specialty?
Yeah, yeah,
Brain surgery or
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Only because of the time that I've spent in it. I'm an expert in C#. I'm an expert in .NET. I'm an expert in large scale systems integration and like large scale scaling large systems like cloud systems. I am currently an expert on doing that in Azure, but I don't think I would not feel bad interviewing for an AWS job because again, it's like saying I'm an expert at Hondas. I'm pretty sure I could get up on Toyotas fast.
Yeah, what I like to think about is T-shaping your knowledge. So you have one thing that you are more expert at. So for me, that would probably be React at this point in my career as a hard skill, and then as a soft skill, teaching code. Those are the two things that I've specialized in. I have spent a huge amount of time researching these things, using them on my day job, learning about them. But then there's a whole bunch of other things that I have shallow knowledge about and can speak to and can use and implement, but they're not things that I've dedicated huge chunks of my career to. So things like CSS. Like I can write CSS totally fine, but it's not something where I'm going out and teaching other people CSS that often, other than introductory workshops. Or I can speak to a lot of cloud services, especially now, but it's something that I'm newer to. So I really like this idea of you're going to have to know a bunch of things in order to use them in your development career, but a lot of these people who you think of for certain things have specialized really deeply on something. And I think, Angie, you're kind of a perfect example of this with testing. Like if somebody thinks of testing, they think of you. And so having this one thing that you are kind of known for or have made yourself an expert in, because I think there's this slogan that's like the riches are in the niches or whatever, and I think that that might be overrated because being a generalist I think is great as well, but people tend to go to experts on things, and so having some of that is definitely worthwhile.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would say, I've consciously devoted like a lot of time and effort into becoming an expert in testing as well as Java. So those are the things that I'm like, yeah, I could give my TED talk without prep on those, right? But that doesn't mean I stick there. So much like Scott has said, you are going to limit yourself if you stick to just your faves, right? So I could very well have said, look, I've been in the game almost 20 years. Java is what I know, and that's it. Well, JavaScript like came on the scene. I've been in the industry long enough to remember when JavaScript was laughed at, right? No serious programmers did JavaScript. And now like JavaScript is that girl, and you know if you don't know it, you get left behind. So I do know JavaScript, and I've built like apps and stuff like that in JavaScript. My side project is in JavaScript and stuff like that. I can hold my own. I'm not going to label myself a JavaScript expert or anything like that, but being able to continue that knowledge, learn more, not be so married to a specific tool or technology that you don't want to learn anything new is going to help you in your career, I feel.
Go
My
ahead.
tip here is master and move along, which means like go deep on a topic, go all in on it for a month, 2 months, 6 months, get to know it, and then move on to the next thing. Like don't let go
Right.
of that thing, but that's just something you have, and then go on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. Before you know it, like people always ask me like, are you a generalist or a specialist? I'm like, I'm kind of the JavaScript guy, but the what that covers is absolutely massive, from scraping to animations to e-commerce to CMSs. There's
Right.
just tons of stuff.
But Wes, you didn't say I'm the jQuery guy or I'm the MooTools guy or I'm the Angular guy. You didn't paint yourself into a corner.
Yeah, like
You're a
I'm not the
okay.
React guy. People like to say that about me. I'm like, no, I'm not the React guy. Like,
See,
yeah,
this
of
is the
course
thing.
that's a
Like
tool I use.
React is great, and I'm sure that React is changing lives, right? Like no disrespect to React. But like, I remember when jQuery was the greatest thing since God talked to Moses, and now it's
Yeah.
just not a thing.
That's
So
right, Scott. That's right. Like I did all of this learning. That's the thing too. You start learning something,
right,
and by the
so
time you become the expert in it, everybody has
right.
moved on to the next
React,
thing.
listen, like people need to understand React will not be the thing forever. I used to code in Object Pascal and Delphi, and I
Yeah.
used to code in Clipper. I mean, seriously, y'all, Google for Clipper. I was an expert in that, and you've never heard of it. So, like, learn React, but don't like tie your usernames and your life and your third page of your resume to like everything about React, because that's like saying I only know how to drive BMWs, but I can't drive any other car. Know about cars.
I think this is all really like true, but I don't want to scare people and make them think that like if React is the thing that you know right now, that's bad. It's not.
No, not at
As
all.
you
Yeah.
move on in your career, you are going to pick up other things naturally. It is going to happen. You're going
Yeah.
to need to help out a
Yes.
team or a colleague and just pair program and figure this thing out, or there's going to be you're going to do a deep dive into something potentially new and say, could this be a good tool for us? And once you learn something deeply, and this is why what Wes said is so critical and the T shape is so critical. Once you learn something deeply, you can apply those patterns in parallel to how to do the same thing in something else. So when
Bingo.
I tried to learn programming, I made a really bad mistake. I blame school. But I was trying to learn Java and Python and the freeware version of MATLAB all at the same time. And it was just bad. And then when I sat down and I learned Java in depth, then I could learn Python. Then I could learn PHP. Then I could learn JavaScript. Then I could do all of these other things because I was applying patterns I already
Yes.
knew.
And even better, this is really great that you mentioned this Java example. You went deep into Java. I would hope if I had a C# job open, you would apply. And every time I threw a C# or .NET question at you, you would say, well, I'm very familiar with the Java VM. I'm very familiar with these patterns in Java, because you're 85% of the way there.
I'm convinced that learning Rust is going to get me closer to C than Java ever did.
Yeah, but yeah, exactly. That Rust will get you closer to C, or Go will get you close to C. Java gets you close to C#. Like, these are all curly brace languages.
Laurie, are you doing Rust now at your new job?
It's not at my job. It's what I'm teaching myself on the side because I'm a geek.
Got it. Yeah, but that's totally true. Like I talk about this all the time, and I can't get my thoughts together enough to write about it because I want to write about how basically everything in programming is essentially a tool, and these tools exist in any of the language. It's just like English, right? So as we speak English, all of the concepts we talk about can be said in any other language, right? They just use different vocabulary or whatever for that. So same for the languages. Once you understand, like, I need to repeat something, that means I use a loop, right? Okay, loops exist in all the languages or whatever. You just figure out, how do I say that in Python? How do I say that in JavaScript? So
Right.
going really deep, you learn like what's available to you, how to solve problems with those tools. I feel confident that any programming job that you put me in, I could do it
Yeah.
because I've gone so deep in Java and I've dabbled in so many other languages that I feel confident. Oh, you got a new language out? I'm going to learn Dart, for example. I'm going to learn that, which is, I think Google made this language for their Flutter development. And that's one of my goals for this year. I want to go and build some mobile apps. So I'm going to learn Dart, and I'm not scared or intimidated at all because I realized, like, oh, it's just another language, and Google's there and there's references and stuff. So I feel okay.
That's really cool. I like to draw a parallel with like actual linguistics. Like you were saying, like there's a for loop in every language, right? There's a way to express intent in every human language. Like we're all humans. So to express I'm hungry might be one word in one human language. It might be a sentence or a paragraph in another. Other languages speak in metaphors. When I teach the differences between different languages, and this is going to get a little geeky, so forgive me, there's a really, really famous Star Trek The Next Generation episode that's worth actually Googling for. that's called Darmok and Jalad at Tanagra. And the entire episode is about trying to have one culture understand another culture through language because the other culture speaks only in metaphors. And watching them go through the how can I understand you, this strange new culture, is the same feeling that we feel when we learn a new language. So if you go and learn JavaScript and then someone says go and learn F sharp or OCaml or Haskell, and you're going to say this is the most foreign language I have ever seen, like humans could never speak this, and then there's a breakthrough that happens and you go, oh, Angie was right, everybody's a human, just put things in a different context and then it'll click and then you'll be able to go for it.
Arrival, the movie, has a similar concept where they're trying to figure out how to translate from a very different type of speaking. And if anyone wants an example of this, there are a lot of posts that you can find where you say, I'm a Python developer trying to learn Java, and someone has written a blog post or made a video that's mapping from one to the other. I literally just did this. I said, I'm learning Rust. I know JavaScript. This is the mapping of the data types that I am used to. And it's a great, great way. And it's how you can be productive, right? So we're talking about understanding things and learning things. You can be productive and make things work without understanding anything by pattern matching, by, finding things that work, trial and error, all of these things. And that's okay. Like, I did a whole job in PHP where I didn't understand PHP. I just had to make the print statements work, and that was fine because it was a short-term thing and I was just making a couple things work.
That's like me trying to order food. Like I can order food in Japanese, but I can't do like a haiku.
Right.
But
Right.
I can make myself understood. And I did not starve.
I would not recommend it, but
Oh, yeah.
that being said, like it's okay. Actually, hilariously enough, I'm about to use an explanation from Scott's podcast with Allie, where they talk about display down learners and the idea of people who make things work and then they dig under the hood, and then people who start at a foundational level and build up from there and figure out what type of learner you are, because not everyone learns the same.
Oh, we should talk about that. That's great. Yeah, Allie and I had a podcast and we talked about, did you learn from the metal, from the silicon up? Like, let's talk about assembly language. Let's talk about these smart rocks that we put lightning inside and taught how to think. Or do you learn from the browser and you press F12 and you start punching a hole in the monitor and moving your way back down? It's like there's a mountain and I'm on one side and you're on the other side and we're tunneling through it. It's the same mountain. It's just a different way to get through the mountain.
And Scott, I really appreciate the Star Trek reference. Judging by my profile picture, it might be more of a Star Wars quote fan myself, but I did want to touch on the point that Laurie was kind of making. I think it's interesting, like looking back through my career, as we brought up like jQuery and React. Through that time, like I started learning jQuery, and I didn't even know JavaScript or jQuery at that point. I was just copying snippets, but I learned JavaScript through jQuery, and the same thing goes with React. As I was learning React, I was learning more JavaScript by getting those fundamentals. So do you think there is a better path for that, learning fundamentals first versus finding the tool that you're most interested in or whatever it is you're interested in and learning through that?
There's a better path, but the better path is entirely dependent on who you are. So there's no universal answer. The better path for me is not going to be the better path for someone else. But you'll figure out what your better path is after you do it wrong. And then the next time in the next language you learn, you'll be like, oh no, that didn't work. I got to try it this way. It'll be better for me.
Well, that brings up the important point that we need to give our early and career developers and our people that are joining our company that are just getting started the freedom to fail without fear and fail as fast as possible, because that's the gift that we were given, and give them that privilege and lend our privilege to them so that they might feel that they can screw up in learning something and then find their way.
I think that brings up another good point that Alex Chester on Twitter was asking about learning on the job versus learning like on a more traditional or even a self-taught route. Like, how valuable do you feel like that real experience is compared to doing tutorials or whatever it is that you feel that you do best learning, but compared to that real experience?
I think a mix of both is really important. I always tell people like take what we're doing in the tutorials, but like don't stop there. Like, hopefully you're excited about it enough, or something goes off in your head. Go, oh, I could apply this to X, Y, and Z. So whether that is doing your own project and solving your own real world problems, or whether that's actually doing it in the job, I think that's where that last 10% will come from. And that's often the most important 10% because that's where you really start to hit the walls and actual problems and whatnot.
Yeah, I very much agree. Tutorials are incredibly important. They should very much be done, but the learning should not stop there no matter what. So the way that people learn is actually by doing. And people overemphasize learning styles. This is something that I always hear is that people talk like, "Are you a visual learner? Are you a reading learner? Do you learn best from a classroom?" And it actually turns out that scientifically, most people are a combination of the above, and you actually learn best if you learn the same thing in multiple ways. And the best way to make it actually stick is to do something with that knowledge and not just learn it in the theoretical basis, but to actually do the thing. Like following the step ABC is something that almost anybody can do. But if you have to put B, C, and D in together in a different order and in order to make something new, that's what you're going to be doing on the job. That's why you're hired as a developer. If you are building the same thing that everybody else has built again, then we probably wouldn't be getting paid to do our jobs. And so it's important to challenge yourself to take those skills out of the same order as the tutorial and to challenge yourself to build something different than that. I actually have a full blog post series on this called Moving Past Tutorials. It's on Dev2. And so I would say check that out if that's a place that you're in.
That
Yeah,
moving past tutorial. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Angie.
I was going to say, yeah, to Allie's point. So I used to teach as an adjunct professor in the university. So I taught Java programming courses to students, right? And one thing that I found they struggle with, like everything I said made sense to them. They would smile, they would laugh, everything's good. They code along with me, and they feel very, very confident, right? And then I would give them an exercise either in class or as homework to do themselves. And it wasn't even taking the steps out of order, but essentially apply what you've just learned to a new problem. And it tripped them up. Like people could not take the lesson. I think they were more so focusing on the syntax and stuff like that versus how to utilize this stuff and what it's used for. So if you're doing tutorials, that's not what to focus on. Don't focus on, oh, this is the syntax for whatever, looping through something or conditions or whatever. Like that's cool, but you can always look that up. What you want to focus on, what is this, what is it used for, and when would I need to use it? And so then you can apply that to other problems and you're not tripped up.
I actually have a rule for if I'm ever doing tutorials for a new technology that I've not used before, which is whatever example that I'm walking through, and it's okay to walk through examples. Like no one's saying that it's not a fair place to start, but if there are variables, if there are function names, I cannot use the ones written on the page. I have to make new ones. And you would think that this would not be that challenging, but what you realize is that a lot of the happy path tutorials that you look at use example as the name of the variable and then example as the string that it's pointing to, the value. And then all of a sudden, the things you thought were connected and the things that you thought were, repetitive and the same aren't. And when you have to replace those and use different variable names and different values, you quickly start to notice what is connected to which and start understanding how things are actually working.
So agree. And to speak to teaching in a classroom, and I had the rule for myself that I would teach in this way for the most part. I do, which is me talking about why something's important or the conceptual framing for something. We do, which is me writing code on a projector and them following along, or on Zoom or however you're teaching. And then you all do, which is when I break them into groups and have them all try to write or complete an assignment together. And then you do it independently, and that's usually the homework where they're reinforcing the thing. So they're seeing that same topic over and over and over again in different ways, having to apply it themselves after me applying it for them. But yeah, I think that's something that you can kind of incorporate in your own learning as well if you're self-teaching, that you start with conceptual framing, you understand why something's important, then you do a tutorial, and then you make yourself build an app using that same stack. I'm gonna have to drop off, unfortunately, though. My parents are visiting for the first time in a year, and so I'm gonna have to go run and see them. But this was a really awesome chat.
No worries. Thanks for stopping by.
Thank you.
Cool. So I think, pushing that a little further. So I think we all can agree, and I think a lot of people that, or everybody up here that's talking, we're all kind of interested in continuing to learn. And I think there's a lot of people out there who feel like maybe they're past the fundamentals, where I don't think that might necessarily be the actual case, because I think there's never enough to learn. But for those people who are looking for advanced learning or continuing education, do those same rules apply, or is there kind of a different way to look at it?
Can you restate that?
Yeah, sure. So I mostly trying to talk along the lines of like advanced learning and continue education. Like, what's a good way to approach? Because a lot of the tutorials out there you'll see are more of the introductory things. And where can people who still want to keep learning? What kind
I
of
gotcha.
resources?
Okay, so I've written about this on my blog extensively, specifically that a lot of people don't realize to be a good writer, you need to be a good reader. I'm having this conversation with my 15-year-old right now because he wants to be a screenwriter, but he's never actually read a script. So he's like, I'm going to write this movie about zombies. It's going to be amazing. It's like, well, dude, well, go and find some scripts. Read someone else's scripts. You can't just pull it out of thin air. The great thing about the open source community is that you can find a huge, non-trivially sized application that has already been written and runs and works and is successful, and you can read that code. And I've always felt that people should be reading at least as much as they're writing. And I think that that is a lost art, reading and understanding large code bases. It's a huge resource for advanced learners.
One of the things that happens is that people assume that code gets infinitely harder when it's not like the simple case or the happy path. And typically, it's the challenge is integrating 5 different happy paths together or integrating 5 different quote unquote simple things together. So when you're a mid level learner, you're trying to do continuing education, pick a new tool, pick a new piece of the puzzle, and add that on top of an application that you have. You don't necessarily need to start Greenfield all the time because, to be perfectly honest, it is very rare that you're working on a Greenfield application. I myself am working on a Greenfield application in a job for the first time in my career. I've only ever done iterative pieces of the puzzle before or, legacy applications. So when you're adding something new, even if it seems simple, it gets a lot more complicated when it's sitting on top of something that already exists that isn't, the happy path that you're supposedly working on.
Someone just messaged me and said, learning by working on a hobby or interest is a great way to keep people tethered to continuous learning. Motivation is always hard, so an exciting
Mm.
goal is usually key. And this is Noel Barron, and he says, I learned databases trying to build an art gallery for fan art for my favorite band. And I think that's pretty cool. So that's one of the things too. Like we get boxed into a tech stack, whatever tech stack you're working on at work, right? And I sometimes see engineers say something like, "Oh, yeah, I wish I could try, that out, but we do this at work." And that's fine. I don't want to tell anybody that they have to work on side projects or anything like that. But for those who do enjoy that sort of thing, that's an option. So, for example, I have a totally different life that you all don't know about. But I have a fashion game, a web fashion game, and it's huge. And there's like hundreds
Wait,
of
you think we don't know about this? We know
Oh, okay.
about
But
this.
it's like hundreds of thousands of players and it's like massive in features. It's not like a little cat pick app, right? But all of that is in technologies that I wasn't using in my day job, but I was able to learn those things in a practical setting by building something that I enjoy and want to play myself. So I think that's a really great point, Noel.
I absolutely 100% like agree with that. Number one thing is to find something that you're interested on the side. Like people will go and make little portfolio apps. Like I'm going to make a tic tac toe app. You can't be passionate about a tic tac toe app. But if you can do your church's or your mosque's website, or you could take and make a menu ordering system for a local small business, like do something fundamentally that solves a problem. Do your kids' little league, scheduling app. There's 1,000 different problems that need to be solved out there, and any one of them is going to be much more compelling. And I also think that people should write at least once their own blog from scratch, register their own domain, register their own SSL certificates, and keep the blog running for a year. That way you're carrying the pager, as they say, like you're keeping a site alive, but it's not a site that matters. It's not like you're saving babies. You're just keeping a site running. And I've been running my own blog, my own podcast for 20 years. And in doing that, I'll get paged at I'll get a text, the website's down, this thing got corrupted. And I learn about logs and debugging and the problems of running a production site and securityheaders.com and all these things that I fundamentally would never have learned about if I had just used WordPress.
I think there's a lot of value to that too, because I think a lot of people sometimes look down on people for using, X technology on their personal site, like why it's overkill, right? Over engineered. But like I see my personal website as an opportunity to break things and learn new technologies on it. And yeah, it might be over engineered, but I'm having fun with it and I'm learning things.
Oh, that's so true. My blog is completely over engineered. It's ridiculous. Like there's no reason for me to have my own blog,
I
but it's mine.
I
I'm
talk
glad
about
y'all said that because I do judge people. I'm like, why would you build your
Angie, my blog slash website and the private repo that houses it is where my coding skeletons go to die. Okay,
Hmm.
there's a lot of scary things in that closet.
That the running your own blog thing is the kind of thing where it's like, again, we get back to the Uber car scenario. You want to be a car renter? That's cool. But if you want to build your own car from scratch, like a kit car, everybody's got like an uncle or an auntie who's like got that car they've been working on for 30 years in the back. That's fun. It's fun to tinker, and a blog is the new kit car.
Except when you see all your friends' blogs and they have all these fancy features, and then you end up making yourself a backlog of features that's like 100 miles long.
That's
I
definitely
blame
dangerous.
Josh Cuomo for this a lot. Everything he has, I'm like, I need it. Drat. Okay. More
Yep.
things to add.
Yeah, and I think I definitely agree with that. Josh has an amazing blog. Um, the one thing I also like to kind of look for is with some of my past jobs and even my job now, I tried to look at like different parts of the stack. Where one example is with my last job, I did a little bit of work with cloud services. And I know personally, I'm a front engineer. I have no interest in working in cloud services, but being able to learn a little bit of those cloud services made me both more capable as a developer, but I feel like it also helped me work better with my team members because I was able to hold conversations with that little bit of fundamental knowledge.
cool? That's cool. I have a question. Can I ask it? This is
Oh,
from someone else. They said, how do we feel about an apprenticeship model of developer education? And they say they've been invited to engage in one and feel like the path from basics to more mature dev might be better served by learning from more senior developers and by doing rather than on your own. Soft skills, coding for others to read, and collaboration being half or more of the skill set. What y'all think about that?
I love apprenticeships. My only fear is that, like, not every, this is a hard thing to say, not everyone is going to be successful and have a wonderful tech career. An apprenticeship is a great idea, but what happens when you fail? Like, what do we do about those people who fall out?
and just
Yeah,
for go ahead, Wes.
I think it's a great idea. Not necessarily it just has to be like it'd be really cool if there was like more of a system in place where people could have some sort of apprenticeship, but just like just doing it the real world. So whether that is apprenticeship, whether that's getting a lower level job and working your way up and asking lots of questions, or whether that's just like we were just talking about is building something that solves an itch of your own. and you implement things. That's really where the real learning is going to come in, is when you start to do real world stuff that's deployed to the world and is used by real people.
I like that
I
deploy to the world, Wes, because that's the key. Everything,
Deploy
you know,
to the world.
everything works so nicely when it's just local. You know, it's you and your little baby project, and
Yeah.
everything is beautiful. Nobody's messing with it. Soon as you get into the deployment, like just the act of deploying is painful for a lot of folks, you know, figuring all of that stuff out. But not only that, yeah, once it's in the hands of other people, it's a different ball game.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I learned a lot of my lessons about users, you know. I think some of us are spoiled as developers because we don't have to necessarily deal directly with the feedback from customers, right? That kind of gets trickled down to us in the form of new requirements. And, you know, they've taken all of the profanity and what the hell is this that you built? It sucks. All of that has been stripped out, and it gets fed to us in a nice little JIRA ticket. But that's some of the great lessons I've learned on deploying a real app for real users myself, where I'm everything, right? So these comments come straight to me like, this shit sucks. You messed it up. This is worse than it was before. You know, and you learn some of these lessons about how people use your software. I had to learn a lot of hard accessibility issues, things that I never would have thought of. But, you know, who knew there were so many different devices and viewport sizes? And you're like, why are you even using that old browser? But hey, people do. So, you know, these were a lot of considerations that I didn't make when I was just, you know, coding along and getting my little happy path feature to work.
Um, I love the idea of an apprenticeship model, but I also think, I mean, just it's not going to be available to everyone. And I think it might be useful to mention that in my very first developer job, I had a senior engineer that I learned a lot from. But there were two specific ways in which I learned a lot from him. And you can get them for free without an explicit mentor or someone to learn from. So, one is exactly what Scott said before. He would solve problems, and I would read his code and understand how he solved something that was beyond me at that time. You can do that because GitHub is wonderful and there's a lot of open source projects and they are free for you to read. The second thing is I would watch people code. This didn't used to be possible unless you worked with other developers or knew other developers. Twitch is a thing now, and there are an incredible number of people who are very senior who are walking you through how many mistakes they make and all the ways they debug and all the paths they go wrong that they go down that are wrong. And that is invaluable and available to you for free. And I highly recommend you take advantage of it because I have learned infinitely more from watching people code than I have from having a back and forth exchange because I'm not worried about myself, right? I'm not focused on whether I coded the thing right. I'm not worried about solving the problem. I'm literally watching, hey, how did you get around that error you just saw? Oh, I didn't know you could do that. I've only ever been console logging. That sort of thing. That is available to you for free. And those
Yeah.
are two resources that everyone can make use of.
I don't know if other people who demo things for a living have done this before, but many, many years ago, I started consciously making mistakes. So I actually have real mistakes, but I also have fake mistakes where I break stuff on purpose and then I look panicked in order for people to normalize seeing my demos not work 100%. There was a time when I prided myself on making things work always, and then I realized that that was harmful to learning.
Wow. I'm not there yet. I need my
I think
demo flawless.
No, I appreciate that, and I have to. It also is worth pointing out that as a old white guy in tech who's been doing this for 30 years, I have a privilege to be able to fail in the middle of something and then fix it. And I am using that privilege in this context to teach people. When someone feels that they're at that level too, where they can make a mistake or have an error happen and have the audience take it for what it is, as opposed to a representative of me not knowing what I'm doing, then I think it's a useful tool to have in your toolbox.
A slightly safer alternative to that, if you are in a situation where you think you might be judged as not knowing what you're doing, is to do it the quote unquote wrong way, but
There
still
you go.
working, and then do it the right way.
Right.
Angie's seen me do a whole talk where I do lots of really weird
Right.
things and then show the nicer way.
Yeah, you could actually like make that the theme of the talk, like the wrong way and the right way, and go back and forth. And then you're in control and your competence is never going to be judged.
I think the idea of like Twitch and like the parallels between some of these things leads to so like remote learning versus in person. Now, there's kind of like two ways I can kind of see that conversation going. Like one, talking about things like privilege, where being able to have access to maybe a computer and being able to access some of these educational resources, but also it gives people who might not have been able to go to an in-person workshop actually be able to learn something. So I'd love to hear what people think about, since we were all pushed towards a digital life with this pandemic, are we losing something without that in person, or what do you think we might be gaining with the remote learning aspects?
Um, I am a remote worker. I enjoy being a remote worker. I joke that I was remote before it was cool because I was remote before COVID. I will say, this is maybe an unpopular opinion. I think it is harder to be remote as a junior employee. I think there is a lot that you get from being co-located with people, and there's a rubber meets the road there, because the people who have put in their dues and been there for a while, who are senior, obviously want the flexibility of being remote or working from home or not having to relocate somewhere. And if that's part of a mentorship exchange, I don't know what that's going to look like moving forward, but I do think it is more challenging. I'm not saying it can't be done. It absolutely can be, but it requires a newer person who is willing to be incredibly vocal about when they're stuck and not wait too long and try and, twiddle their thumbs waiting for someone to come to them and solve problems. You have to be very, very outspoken if you are learning and you need help, because no one can see you at your desk flustered and frustrated and
Yeah,
overwhelmed.
that's very, very true. You have to be, there's a level of maturity that is really, really hard to maintain. And I've been working remotely for Microsoft in Portland here for 15 years. And as soon as COVID happened, everybody called me and said, "Hey, Scott, you're the remote worker. Give me some tips." Like I've got like 6 tips that's going to make the pandemic not a thing. And I was like, no, like quarantine work is not remote work. Remote work is a joy. I can sit anywhere at McDonald's and the mall, and I can, sit around and hang out at a coffee shop until they give me the side eye. But quarantine work is like, federal prison. It's just like, okay, I'm stuck here. I'm on house lockdown. This is not remote work, and it's difficult. And we actually have both interns starting now at Microsoft and new hires that have never met another human, and they've worked here over a year. That's messed up. Like, I totally agree that humans in person are going to be a really important part of an early in career person's life, at least for the first 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, I think from like a teacher standpoint, I really like doing in-person workshops in classes because you learn a lot more about like where people are dropping off or where they're frustrated. There's a lot of body language, and like even when I would teach in person, there was a big difference from saying, "Do you have any questions?" when I was standing at the front of the room, and "Do you have any questions?" when you're standing beside a table of people. Like it's insane that people are unwilling to ask a question when I am 3 meters away, but willing when I am half a meter away. And throwing that online is even trickier.
So with Test Automation University, this is self-guided courses, and we saw the enrollment and completion numbers skyrocket during the pandemic. And I was curious to why that was, right? So it existed before the pandemic. I wondered if people felt like they had more time, or was it just, I'm at home and I can actually, take a course without feeling like people are judging me for not knocking out Jira tickets, for example. I don't know the reason why, but it was interesting to see.
Cool. I agree. And I think I have just like one more point or one question really until maybe we start taking some questions. But kind of further a little bit on that topic. So, as educational content creators, all of us up here, what do you think? How much of it is our responsibility to make sure that our content can actually reach all communities, marginalized communities? And what kind of things can we do to help that, to get that moving forward? Because I know, Wes, for instance, I remember hearing on the podcast how you make an explicit effort for things like purchase parity, which is awesome. So, what kind of things can we as developer or content creators do to help that?
Another thing that I've had great feedback on is providing captions. Not I do have some blind users take my course, but a majority of the people who use the music captions are ESL. And like it's awesome because there's not necessarily any content in their language, and I have this weird funny Canadian accent. They can't always understand it because I'm saying JavaScript funny. But if they're able to also have the captions up at the same time, then all of a sudden it it's a much more accessible way to learn the content.
So I have the luxury of a lot of the content I make is free, entirely free. You can access it wherever you want. And that's because I have a full-time job, and being a creator is not my full-time job, and it's sort of extra, but it still takes a lot of time. It still takes a lot of resources. So there are, some courses I've made, for example, that are paid. I think it's a hard balance because for people who are full-time creators, like that's their life, that's their livelihood, and it's not free to do any of this. So to people who want to learn, there are a ton of free resources out there. Please make use of them. And for the things that are paid, make really in intentional choices about what things you want to spend money on and you're actually going to make use of. And purchase parity is a really awesome thing that a lot more people are providing, which I think is great to see.
Yeah, one of the people who does that very well, she was in here earlier, but she left, Julia Evans. So I really like her zines that she makes, very educational. And often she will provide, it's very honor system, but she'll say, like, if you're in another country or you can't afford it for whatever reason, then, here I'm making these available for free, a certain number, or I'm making, a few of them discounted. So that's really nice as well. One thing that I've done as part of my role as a developer advocate. So, as a developer advocate, I believe that my job is to educate other developers and also to advocate for them. So, I've been fortunate enough to create that whole Test Automation University platform and make all the courses available for free. And I get my employer to sponsor that initiative. So that's my way of trying to give back to the community. And we still pay all the instructors and all of that, but it's at no cost to engineers who simply want to make, quality software.
Anybody else want to touch on it before we move to questions? All right, so I'm going to try to pull up a few people here. Let's see. See which one connects first. No. Seems like every time I try to add a speaker, it drops out. Hey, Shivangi. Hopefully I said that right. Do you want to go with your question? Shivangi?
Hello.
Hey.
Yeah, you spelled it right. I would like to ask if I should learn JavaScript after HTML and CSS, or I should do something else for like front end design and development.
So since that was a little bit hard to hear, I'm just going to repeat the question. So they're asking, should they learn JavaScript, HTML, and CSS for front-end development and design, or if there's something else that they should be trying to learn?
Yeah, absolutely. I think she asked, should I use JavaScript after HTML and CSS?
Oh, sorry.
And
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, I already
um,
learned HTML and CSS.
yeah, that's the natural progression for front end development. So absolutely, there are like other things you can learn. Like you might be thinking, should I learn TypeScript? Like, what's the difference between those two? Or like, should I use some other language that can create front ends? And at the end of the day, all of those things compile down to JavaScript. JavaScript's the only thing that will run in the browser now that Flash is gone, RIP. So yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great way, and you can go into learning other frameworks and whatnot, but absolutely, learning JavaScript is the best next step.
I'll also say that I have a post I wrote about this a while back called The Layers of JavaScript. And when you're first approaching some of these things where they're all bundled together, if you use anything that has JSX, it can be a little bit confusing to tell what's CSS, what's HTML, what's JavaScript, what's the framework doing magic for you, what's additional tooling on top of it. So if you can sort of break those pieces down and build them on top of each other, it'll give you a better idea of what those different layers are. And if you know what the layer is, it's easier to debug what's gone wrong.
Cool. Thanks. Thanks, Shivangi. Dahlia, do you want to go next?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much for having this space. The discussion has been super enlightful. So I was wondering what the process was for each person here on learning a new language or a new tool. So, when I had a traditional background, so I wasn't used to going out there and discovering things and doing things on my own. And I've recently found my love of like YouTube videos to learn things, but I didn't think of that as like really a viable way to learn something. And I'm wondering, what are other people using? So if someone asks you, go off and learn something new about, Kubernetes or AWS or whatever, what are the typical steps you go through so that we can get some ideas on that?
I can go. When I'm tackling something new, and I do this in all areas of my life. I was laughing today because I'm getting super into lawn care right now, and I was like, man, this is the most hilarious way that I'm learning it the same way I would learn a technical thing. Is first I just try to inhale as much as I can from the different areas online. So watching talks and YouTube videos and reading blog posts and sending out tweets, asking open-ended questions about specific technology. And what that does is it gives you a really good, and just like sort of standing back, it gives you a really good outline of what the landscape of this specific topic is, and gives you an idea of what the space is. And then from there, then you start to look at a few example applications as to stuff people have built before. And then it's time to just dive in and start to try to build something yourself. And that's where a lot of that's where you start to hit like, oh, I never touched upon this thing before. Oh, that makes sense. I remember hearing about generics, but I didn't understand why you would need that. And that makes total sense about it now.
Cool. Thanks, Dahlia. Or Laurie, did you have something you wanted to add?
No, I'm good.
Cool.
I did. I
Uh,
wanted to say,
yeah.
for me, I always try to go into it with some type of project in mind, because I feel that helps me apply the concepts, right? So if I'm just watching a video and just like taking the quizzes, I'll do okay. Like I've done that with a few topics, but I don't know those topics anymore. Like I don't know anything about them anymore. I just did enough to like get the certificate, I guess, and say that I know it, but I don't know it anymore. But the ones that I do now, I typically have some kind of project in mind. Like I said, I want to build. I have a very specific project in mind of a mobile app I want to build. So now I'm gonna go learn. That gives me an excuse, right? I'm gonna go learn Dart and I'm gonna learn Flutter with that in mind. And so I feel like the concepts they stick a whole lot better when I have to apply them to something I care about.
Definitely agree. Thanks, Dahlia. Tunde, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, so yeah, this is a very good topic, developer education, and I think there's been several times that while learning as well, there will be times that I will need to take one of these tutorials to solve a problem. But I found out that maybe some of the makers of these tutorials are either disingenuous with the topic they push out there, or maybe they don't really have they just want the crowd. They are not really about teaching any learner the trade that they are, maybe the professor that they are teaching. So maybe this is more of an advice now that, okay, for example, we have new React Redux hook, and it's really one thing that you really need to take care, be careful about when you're learning it. But you find out that people still push out React tutorials with the old way of doing it. So I would suggest that anybody that is trying to teach anybody anything should try to more or less like measure up to the technology, the latest technology now. You just measure up to it. Don't there's no need to you reduce whatever you're trying to push out there. At the end of the day, we will learn it. It's better to just give out your best, and and let any other person that is learning take it up from there. That's just my maybe advice, though. That's just it.
Cool, thanks. Did anybody want to touch on that before we go to the next question?
So there was something that I just sort of tangentially thought based on that comment. Don't expect that everything you read is going to be based on the latest and the greatest, and that's intentional, because a lot of the things that people write about are from technology that they're actively using, and a lot of people aren't using the latest and greatest. So figure out what version you're using, or what solution you're solving, whether that's legacy or otherwise, and try and find resources. Like I'm about to write something on Husky version 6, which is awesome, because I had to learn how different it was from Husky version 4, because Husky version 4 is what I've been using for a number of years now. And it's hard to figure out a place in time that something was written, and we as educators actually can do a better job of that. It's not about showing whether or not something is quote unquote stale, but it's giving context to the time in which it was written so that people can apply it appropriately.
That's an excellent point. I write a lot about like newer features in Java, and that comes from a place of privilege that I'm working as a developer advocate, and that's kind of my job, is to learn about the latest and greatest. But lots of times my audience is comprised of people that are 8 versions back. You know what I mean? Dahlia's in here, she can attest to this. They cannot move to the latest and greatest because they have, this huge application that's relying on that version, and they haven't gotten the buy-in to be on the latest and greatest. So while I can definitely make tutorials about that, I have to be realistic in what people are doing in their day-to-day jobs.
Cool. Thanks, Tunde. Sweet Pete, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. Do you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, you pronounced it right. My name's Rachel. So I actually have a question on, does anybody have like resources or suggestions on resources for how to think like a programmer? So I'm a self-taught engineer, and the syntax isn't an issue for me, and I think you guys touched on this early on. in the discussion. It's more of like taking the tutorials and the information that I'm given and then reapplying that outside in like a different scenario that I struggle with. And I don't know how to fill that in without formal education being 100% self-taught.
Ooh, I've got a couple of suggestions there. First, there was a book that I did work on, so I wrote the foreword, called The Imposter's Handbook, which was written primarily by my friend Rob Connery, who has a degree in geology and is a programmer and a very successful one. And because he has imposter syndrome about not having a degree, he went back and learned all the things he needed to know and then explained them in plain English. So there's Imposter's Handbook, Volume 1 and Volume 2. They're quite good. And then another thing you might take a look at is Nicole Archambault, Arch Ambault, has an online school. It's the Newbie Coder Problem Solving School. And she basically has a course that teaches you how to problem solve like a coder, but doesn't ever show a line of code. So it is literally a code agnostic, text agnostic problem solving school. That might be worth taking a look at.
That's really cool, and I've never heard of that.
Yeah, she's very active on Twitter, and she put that together because she is neuroatypical and was not finding a way to teach problem solving that didn't involve like, here's a bunch of Python, let's solve a problem. So I thought it was cool that you could put an entire coding course together without ever showing a line of code. And I had her on my podcast as well, so you can take a look at that, and there are transcripts.
Awesome. Thanks, Rachel. So I'm going to pull in William, before we move to you, I'm going to pull in a DM question. So Fernanda is asking, what do you think the role of is for unstructured experimentation? So that means kind of just doing things for the sake of trying something new without even necessarily having a need or a specific project in mind.
What's the beginning of that question?
So what's the role of unstructured experimentation in your like educational path?
Context matters here. The role of experimentation is wonderful if you're learning on your own time. If you're learning on employment time because you're trying to solve a problem or you're asked to look into something, that's a little bit different. So I'm going to assume that this is your own time. You have to decide whether you as a person are someone who goes down a rabbit hole or not. If experimentation is the way that you find new things you're excited about and discover things you want to dive into, by all means go ahead. If experimentation is your way of avoiding the thing that you actually need to learn to meet your end goal, then remind yourself that that's the kind of person you are and maybe stay away from it.
That is really important advice, because what I'm hearing underneath what you just said is intentionality and deliberate practice. Like, to put it somewhat coarsely, like just dicking around with software and trying to get a light to light up is fine, but it's also an easy way to lose hours and hours of your day. And being deliberate about, why am I here? Pausing for a moment and saying, what is it I'm trying to learn? Do I know that I'm going to go down a rabbit hole that is not productive because I know that about myself and I have that intentional understanding of how I'm wired? I know I can lose hours if I don't have a focused plan. So I tend to start with a problem and go from there. That was great advice.
I'm actually the exact opposite of that. I literally wrote some code to turn a heater on, not a light, but a heater on the other day, and I didn't need to. I could have walked across the room and turned it on. But how I get into a lot of learning myself is just poking around, trying stuff out, and a lot of it leads nowhere. But I know that I've learned a lot along the way, and sometimes I stumble upon something that is really interesting, and it does become something. So I'm a big fan of the sort of just open ended exploring.
It sounds like you're still doing it with intention, though.
Yeah, that's true. Like, I was intentionally trying to turn on my heater, but a lot of it is just kind of looking around and learning how things work. I guess you could say that is the intention.
And I think the reason that my answer went in that direction is I'm assuming that a lot of people who are learning because they're trying to get a job. and they're trying to get their first job, and they don't have endless amounts of money and time and resources to learn. Like, learning is to reach a goal. If that's not the case, if you are learning for the sake of learning, do whatever the heck you want and enjoy it.
Definitely agree. So we have really time for 2 questions hopefully in here. William, one's going to be a DM. William, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thanks. Just before I get to my question, a while back, Angie was mentioning Flutter and Dart, which I've had to learn over the last 2 days, job interviews. I must just say that the Getting Started tutorial for Flutter is fantastic, and then the Google Code Labs are great. So if anyone on here is having doubts about trying out Flutter and Dart, I highly recommend it. And then my question, again,
Send me the
from
link.
earlier,
Send me the link, Williams.
I'll send it to you, no problem.
Okay.
And my question, it was from earlier, we were talking about content creators. Might be a bit of an easy one, but I try and support the content creators when I can, when it's not a free course. And Udemy, I'm going to imagine people might groan, have sales. Now, if I buy a course on a sale, does the money actually go to the creator? Or am I better off, if I want to be honest, buy it when it's full price? Thanks.
Depends on the platform, I think, right?
Yeah, you lost me at
I
Udemy.
I don't think that I don't have anything on Udemy either, but like, I wouldn't sweat that too much. If people are really hurting because their stuff is on a platform like that, then they should probably move it off onto some other platform that treats them a bit better. So I don't think you as a consumer should sweat that too much.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you.
Content creators tell other
will say
people
just really
about my stuff.
quickly. Yeah. The other thing I'll say really quickly is for something that's not on a platform like that, if you are in a situation where your employer is paying for your education and you have a budget and there are different options for, like, if you're a person paying for it versus an employer, please try and be honest based on what is available to you. I think those price points exist for a reason. That's not something I've personally done, but I've seen it a lot, and I think it goes a long way towards helping creators when they know that they're trying to give different options for people who have sponsored education budgets and those who do not.
I was once CC'd on an email of somebody sharing the password to the login to my course platform with like 40 other of their developers, and I was like, "Hey guys, I don't think you forgot. I don't think you meant to include me on this email, but please don't share that amongst all of your employees. That's not the point."
That's thanks, William. And for one last question, this came from a DM from Bhaskar. How do you avoid, or what can you do to help avoid decision paralysis? And I feel like this could go both from a learning perspective, where like you're trying to figure out what you want to learn, and also from an educational creator as well.
Can I add to that question? Because someone has something similar they sent me, and they basically wanted to know, like we were talking about how some things go out of style or whatever. How do you figure out like what you should be focusing on? Which one is a marketable one?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, I will go first. One of the things I recommend to people is to kind of look around. So look at job postings, look at, I was going to say Twitter, but Twitter will make you think that the whole world is JavaScript with a little bit of Python, when us Java kids are out here running the world on a gazillion devices, honey. So, but yeah, look at job postings. Like go on something like, what's the job site, y'all? LinkedIn,
Indeed.
Yeah, go on those and kind of whatever kind of job you're looking for. So you want to do back end, you want to do API, or you want to do front end, whatever. Look for like your dream job on there and see what the recs are. See what people are asking for. A lot of things that Twitter might make you think is a dated thing that nobody uses. You see, man, they got a lot of jobs for that. What they talking about? So that's the real world. So there's Twitter and then there's the real world, right? So look in the real world to figure out like what's in demand.
Yeah, Twitter-driven development is a joke, but it's a joke for a reason. Everything Angie said is 1,000% accurate. I would also add that the things that are popular on Twitter and the things that are commonly being taught as the next best thing, and taking over the front end universe or what example, there's a lot of competition for those jobs because those are the new shiny things. If you learn something that's maybe a little bit less common for new learners, but very much needed, especially in large enterprise organizations. Like, people say Angular is dead. Angular is not dead. Angular is everywhere. Angular 1 is still running in a whole lot of places. So if that's something that you learn because you're interested in JavaScript, there are a whole lot of jobs that are available to you that aren't necessarily going to be a great fit for someone who's focused or just come out of a bootcamp learning React who intentionally wants to work in that space. The thing I will say on analysis paralysis specifically is it's really hard. I myself don't have a great solution to it. And I find that if there are things that I'm prioritizing and I keep skipping over one of them, it's not something that I really want to do. So I either need to force myself to do it if it's something that is intentional and purposeful and necessary towards the goal, like Scott was saying earlier, or it just needs to drop off and I need to accept that, maybe someday I'll come back around to it when it's critical and necessary, but it isn't right now.
Awesome. Well, that's unfortunately all the time we have for today. I want to thank you all so much for hopping on here and chatting. Do any of you want to give one last thought before we drop off?
Thanks
Selfishly,
everyone.
I would say thank you, and selfishly listen to my podcast because there's a lot of great topics, and a lot of the people here have been on my podcast, and you can hear them even longer talk about cool stuff.
Yeah, listen to Scott's podcast. It's great.
+1 for Scott's podcast.
Yeah, listen to Scott's podcast.
He paid us
Wes
to do this commercial.
Wait, okay, hold on. I want to do this. Go to Test Automation and support Angie's stuff. Listen to Scott's podcast and watch his TikToks. Listen to Wes's podcast and buy his courses. Read Allie's blogs and listen to Ladybug. And for me, you can just laugh at me on Twitter. That'll be great for me.
This conversation brought to you by Scott's podcast. Cool. Well, thanks again, everybody. I hope everybody has a wonderful weekend. Take care.
Bye.
See ya. Thanks
Thanks
again.
for hosting, Colby.